So we'd like to start out with Dr. Heath Lambert. Let's give him a warm welcome here at City on the Hill and our Sexual Purity Forum. Amen. Dr. Lambert, just tell me a little bit about yourself. You married, children?
Yeah, I've been married for 11 years to my wife, Lauren. We have 3 kids. Our oldest son is Carson. He's 9. Our daughter, Chloe, is 6. And our son, Connor, just turned 4 last Wednesday, and he's a crazy little rascal. So.
Awesome. Just want to remind you, I know you live in Kentucky. Did you know this is Seattle, and the Seahawks are located in Seattle?
Yeah. It doesn't matter that I lived in Kentucky. My wife grew up in Philadelphia, so if I don't root for the Eagles and the Phillies and the Sixers and all those, I'm in trouble when I get home. So I don't care who you guys root for.
Awesome. Well, it's good to have you. There's a lot of books on the market about sexual purity, pornography. What challenged you, or what motivated you to write another book? Why did you feel a need for another book about sexual purity and pornography?
Well, as far as I'm aware, I've read certainly all the Christian books about pornography. And I read them as a pastor and as a biblical counselor who was trying to find good resources to help the people in my churches deal with this problem. And the problems that I found with all the books that were out there were some combination of 3 problems. So one problem was that the books were really very graphically sexual. And I'm going, I just can't imagine giving this book to a parent who's got a 14 or a 15-year-old struggling with it. Because, we're talking about naming pornographic websites and describing sexual acts and stuff where you go, you're reading the book and you weren't thinking about this stuff before you read the book, and now reading their book, it's worse. So I wanted to write a book that avoided that had a frank conversation of pornography without being filthy. And then another problem that I would find with books was that they just weren't practical enough. So it's very popular to write books and articles about pornography where you talk about how bad the problem is. You talk about the statistics of actors and actresses in pornography. You talk about how many videos are made a year. You talk about how much money the porn industry makes a year. And all of that information can be helpful in describing just sort of how big the problem is. But one of the things that I always say is nobody who struggled with porn changed after they found out how many billions of dollars the porn industry made. And so I wanted to write a book that didn't just describe the problem, but gave practical strategies for how to help. How do you help people take the next step to get out of this mess? And then a third reality that drove me to want to write the book is when you read Christian books about pornography, one of the most discouraging things about them is it's very common to not describe the power that's available to Christians to defeat this problem, namely the gospel. And so I wanted to write a book that was grounded and founded on the work of Jesus and the gospel to set people free. I wanted to write a book that described the practical strategies that enabled change. And I wanted to write a book that was honest and candid, but not graphic and sexual.
So I want to talk a couple minutes about just personal purity here, and it might be somebody here struggling with that, or there might be someone here or watching online who thinks, what's the big deal? What's wrong with, looking at a naked person? I don't see anything wrong. Why even do this sexual purity? So is there any damage to pornography? Is it bad? Sorry for asking, but just wanted to, why even spend time writing a book about it? What's so bad about it?
Yeah, that is the question that our culture is asking. The question our culture is asking is, what's the big deal? In fact, when you read Supreme Court decisions that have gone down about the issue of pornography, when you see how the pornographic industry has argued this issue, it's a freedom of speech issue. And if you've got somebody that wants to make one of these movies, if you've got women and men that are happy to act in these movies, if you've got people that are happy to pay for the movies or view them online, then hey, if you don't want to look at the porn, don't look at the porn. But what are you upset about it for? And that argument is based on the wrong assumption that God has not spoken into our lives about how to behave sexually. It's a fine argument if God says anything you want to do sexually is fine. But if God constricts our sexuality and says there's some things that are allowed and some things that are not allowed, then all of a sudden we have to weigh that argument against God's commands. And so just to kind of walk through what the problem of pornography is. So first of all, you have men and women who are fornicating. These are not married people. These are people that are unmarried, and they decide to fornicate together. And if you read the statistics about the pornography industry, most pornographic actors have hundreds and thousands of partners. So in a world where God prescribes sexual monogamy, hundreds and thousands of partners is a terrible distortion of that. Then they fornicate in front of a camera and invite anybody who wants to watch their fornication and delight in it. So pornography asks us to delight in fornication. It asks us to delight in adultery. Then you've got the people watching the pornography. The Bible calls husbands and wives to delight themselves in one another. Pornography trains you to admire and desire the body of someone else. Most of the time, pornography trains you that sexual pleasure can be arrived at alone without your spouse. And that destroys the unitive function that sex is supposed to play. Listen, when you read what's going on in the porn industry, it is nasty, disgusting stuff. The drug abuse rate in the porn industry is somewhere around 90 or 95%, depending on which study that you read. And some people say, well, why are so many people in porn using drugs? Well, when you talk to pornographic actresses, you find out why. What you see on the screen when you're looking at pornography is only a very, very small portion of what happens. The reality is what these women are asked to endure is so vile and so disgusting and so physically harmful that you don't see when you look at pornography all the times they have to say cut so a woman can go puke in a trash can because she's completely disgusted by what she's being asked to do. You don't see the time she starts bleeding or becomes injured because of things she's been asked to do. And so there's been some interviews of women who have been in pornography, several of them on the Covenant Eyes website. And one of those women reports the reason women are on drugs in porn is because we have to get high to perform in the way we're asked to perform. The object of sexual desire that you see on the screen is fake. It's not real. You prop up the abuse and punishment of women when you do that. When you talk about the psychological damage that comes to kids when they see this, your first exposure to sex is as a 4-year-old boy, an 8-year-old boy, a 12-year-old girl, and you grow up learning that sex is about this objectification and it's not about the mutual love that happens in marriage. It is absolutely 100% one of the most destructive things in our culture. So that's some of the things that are wrong.
Let me just say this. We did a survey amongst our children and youth in our church, just anonymously. We asked, hey, what age were you when you first saw pornography? We thought, hey, our families, they're different. So maybe you'd be 20. Sadly, our statistic wasn't different. It's 11, 12 years old. Most answered. Now, there were some 8-year-olds and some 13-year-olds, but when you average it out, it was the same statistic as we read. And what you share is that if that's what our kids are seeing and that's what intimacy is, they get a very different image of what intimacy should be and what a woman is and a man. Here's another question that I'd like to ask. Well, what is sexual purity? Because, sometimes we get this sense, well, if I'm not in pornography, hey, I'm sexually pure. So if someone is not struggling with pornography, would you say, hey, that's all right, they're sexually pure, and so that, all right, you're good to go. God bless you. Next.
That's a great question. In fact, one of the realities that makes me very nervous about this whole pornography discussion is that we will encourage people to think that, well, I'm not looking at hardcore porn, so I'm good. And that's the last thing we want people to think. So I'm thankful for the question. The reality is that once you are looking at pornography, you have been impure in a million different ways. So it's not as though the folks that aren't looking at pornography are in good shape. The reality is, in fact, in the message earlier today, I talked about, imagining this awful room filled with pornography. And the reality is, I didn't say it in here, but the reality is we live in that room. You don't have to go find hardcore moving pornography in a video online. Pornography is in our storefront windows. It's on billboards as we drive through town. It's on commercials that we're watching. It's at the beach when you take your kids to the beach or to the lake. Pornography is everywhere. We are a Christian culture that finds it just acceptable to see movies with naked people in them. If, all they did was take off their shirt, quote unquote, or it was tastefully done, quote unquote. And we have adopted such a low bar for purity that we think porn is the standard to avoid. Well, we need to fight much earlier than hardcore porn. We need to start in our hearts. Purity in the Bible is when I love sexually what God loves sexually, and when I hate sexually what God hates sexually. So that has to do with what I look at, that has to do with how I act, and that has to do with what I want. So anytime I'm not wanting my wife sexually, when I'm desiring someone other than my wife, I'm not being sexually pure, even if I haven't looked at any images. When I am dissatisfied, when a woman would be dissatisfied with her husband physically, she's being impure, even if porn and other images aren't in her life. So purity is about a disposition of the heart to love what God loves and hate what God hates.
Just take a minute. If someone's here who is struggling with that, how do you break free from bondage of pornography, and can you be completely free from that desire?
The great burden that I have with regard to this problem is the answer to this question. And I would say to everybody here that you can be free. In fact, if you're a Christian, you will be free. It's just a question of when. When you die and go to heaven, you will be like Jesus because you'll see him as he is. And so sooner or later, we're all going to be free from every sin. But the Bible was written so that we don't have to wait till we get to heaven to be free of sin in a very real and measurable sense. And the reason that's such a burden for me to people to know that they can be free is because hope is a powerful force in change. If you believe that you just have to look at porn and that you're just stuck, well, then you'll probably live that way. But if you believe that Jesus gives you strength to be different and to change, then you'll live that way. So I really want folks in here to know that regardless of who you are, regardless of what your struggle is, regardless of what you've looked at today or last night or this week or this year, you can be free, you can be different. But being different takes power. Pornography has power. I wish that weren't the case. I wish pornography was just this thing that everybody hated and thought was stupid, like littering. I don't know. I wish porn were as popular as litter. But porn is just more popular than that, and it is powerful. It has an allure, and hundreds of thousands of millions of people are just hooked on it. And if you're going to combat that power, then you need another power, something more powerful that has the ability to loosen the grip of pornography. And the Bible teaches that that power is the gospel of God's grace in Jesus Christ. And so there's all kinds of strategies that we need to use. We talked about some of those this morning. There's all kinds of practical means that we need to employ. But the thing that will set you free from pornography is the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ as it is applied to your life by the Holy Spirit. And so, yes, you can be free, and the way you will be free is by believing the gospel of Christ and his grace, and by putting that gospel of grace into action into your life.
One more last question. One of the things that you mention in your book, and you make a case that pornography, there's a core issue to pornography. So when you look deeper, there's something more than just lust, or pornography, or desire to see a naked woman. There's something deeper than that. What is it? And make a case for that.
Yeah. So the question is, what drives pride, or what drives porn, excuse me. What drives pornography usage? And this isn't something that you can take for granted, because different Christian authors disagree with it. And one of the most common things that you see Christians arguing for is that what drives porn usage is loneliness or neediness or woundedness, as some people call it. And so you're broken and needy, you're lonely, and you need something to fill up that lack that you feel, and so you turn to porn. And porn is what sort of soothes your lonely woundedness. And so the argument is very popularly argued, is that porn is driven by loneliness. There are a couple problems with that. The first problem is that if you give those books to most married couples where one member is struggling with pornography, it just won't make any sense to them. Because most of the couples that I'm doing marriage counseling with in the aftermath of pornography, you've got, the stereotypical guy who's looking at porn, he's kind of hooked on it, and the wife knows something's up. She knows he's not in bed with her at night. She knows that he's got this problem, and she is doing everything she can to reach out to him. She's doing everything she can to be a good wife, to spend time, to be sexual with him. And he's not interested. He wants his porn and not his wife. And so if I said to a wife in an actual counseling session, you know what your husband's problem with regard to porn is he's just lonely. I mean, most of the women I know would punch me in the nose if I said that, because that's just not their experience at all. I think they'd say something like, don't tell me that my husband is lonely, because I'm lonely in bed while he's looking at porn. So that just doesn't work. The reality is there will be some people who look at porn who are lonely, and there's all kinds of lonely people who don't look at porn. There's no correlation between the two. What drives pornography is something much more sinister than loneliness, and it's pride. It's arrogance. Only arrogant people look at pornography. You look at pornography because you do whatever you want to do. You think you run your own show, and if you want to see a little bit of porn, you're going to look at a little bit of porn. And if you want to see a whole big bunch of porn, you're going to look at a whole big bunch of porn. And you don't care what God says about it. You don't care what your wife thinks about it. You don't care what the people at church think about it. You're just going to do what you want to do. That is not lonely woundedness. That is arrogant, self-exalting pride. The Bible says in James 3:16 that where jealousy and selfish ambition is found, there will be disorder and every vile practice. So the Bible says that when something is a vile practice, it flows from jealousy and selfish ambition. So if porn is a vile practice, and it is, then it flows from a heart that is jealous and selfishly ambitious. You are in it for you. You are a prideful person. And that's really, really important, because if you think that you look at porn because you're lonely, then you'll think that the solution to porn is to find more friends or better friends. But that won't help you. But if you believe that the problem with porn is pride, then you will try to humble yourself before the Lord and seek His grace to be humble, and that will help you. So what you understand to be the problem has everything to do with what you think the solution is. If I feel pain in my chest and I think I've got heartburn and I take Tums, but I'm actually having a heart attack, I'll die. What the problem is really important, and so we can't misunderstand this. We've got to create a culture in our church that understands the root of porn is pride and nurture the solution of humility with that.
Yeah, I think that's important, especially for a doctor, for example. If they misdiagnose you and they start treating you for something else, but your real issue is here, well, it's going to prolong the healing process. And I think pornography, that you've got to start, hey, it's pride. Let's start dealing with your pride. Oh, no, I'm weak, I'm struggling, I'm defeated, I can't. Well, your pride, you're prideful. Let's deal with that, and let's deal with the pride. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to switch to our second part. And we want to talk to spouses, and I'd like to invite my wife for this part as well. I'm going to ask our sound guys if we can get one more mic. If it's possible to get one more microphone, I'd appreciate it.
All right. So about spouses, my first question is, if a spouse discovers that his or her spouse has been looking at pornography, what do? Is it okay to be angry?
Yeah, so I think anger is an appropriate response. The most common responses tend to be anger and some kind of sorrow or depression, often overwhelmingly so. And I would want to say that anger and sorrow are completely appropriate responses in the aftermath of the discovery of porn. And that's not just my opinion. We know that that's appropriate because God is angry and sad about sin. So in fact, it would be wrong if you found out that your spouse was looking at porn and you weren't angry and you weren't sad. If your spouse is sinning and is sinning against you and you are indifferent to that, or you think that's awesome, and some people do think it's awesome. I mean, I've known people that are thrilled to find out something bad about their spouse because they're looking for a way out. They're like, yes, this is my ticket out. Well, that's sinful on your part. If you are not angry or sad or both, I'd want to say you need to repent of that, because our job is to respond to sin the way God does. And so you should be angry, you should be sad. The qualifier on that is you can't sin in your anger. You can't sin in your sorrow. So you can't say, well, I'm angry, so I'm going to hit you in the face. You can't, I had one wife that was furious with her husband in this way, as she should have been. She's supposed to be angry. But she, in the overflow of her anger, she picked up a skillet where she was cooking something, and she hit him in the head repeatedly with it. Blacked his eye, cut his head all up. He had to have stitches. He had burns on his head from the grease in the pan. She was right to be angry, but she sinned in her anger. So Psalm 4 and Ephesians 4 says, be angry and do not sin. And so you can't use your legitimate anger to sin. The larger question of what do we do when you find out that your spouse is looking at pornography is you really should get help from somebody else. You should reach out to somebody that you love and trust who can help you on this.
So it's just the two of you ain't enough?
The two of you are not enough. That's a great question, because a lot of couples think, well, we'll just sort this out. We're going to sort this out, and it's embarrassing. I don't want anybody to know my husband's looking at porn, or I don't want anybody to know my wife is looking at porn, so we'll just sort this out together. But the reality is that's a really bad idea, because you are too emotionally invested in this to figure out what wisdom is. There's all sorts of things that a person who's going to help somebody change needs to do that a spouse is not equipped to do. And so one of the first things you should do is reach out for help from somebody with wisdom. And honestly, the safest bet is to talk to one of the pastors and just say, here's what's going on, we need some help.
Should a wife turn to her closest friends? Does it have to be a pastor?
That depends. In Ephesians 4:15, the Bible says, speaking the truth in love, we grow up into him who is the head, into Christ. And so in Ephesians 4:15, the goal is maturity into Jesus, and the way we get that maturity is by speaking the truth in love. And so the two rules for how we talk to people is, I say true things in a loving way. So I'm looking for somebody who's going to say true things in a loving way. If my best friend is going to say true things in a loving way, then you can talk to your best friend. But if your best friend isn't going to do that, then you need to talk to somebody else. And you just have to be honest with yourself in this, because a lot of times the most comfortable person to tell isn't the best person to tell. And I've mentioned before that I had one lady that went to her best friend, and her best friend decided that it'd be an awesome way to get back at her husband by taking her to singles bars to meet men. So she reached out to her best friend, but that was a bad idea. So sure, reach out to close friends as long as they're going to speak the truth in love. And also, the need to tell somebody does not equal the need to tell everybody. You ought to try to keep the circle as small as possible. You don't need 50 people knowing about it.
Another question is, many women, when they find out that their husband is struggling with pornography, become self-conscious, kind of about themselves, about how they look. Are wives ever the cause? And will changing her appearance change the situation? Can it change the situation?
So I'll answer that question in two ways. First thing to say is your appearance in your marriage is important. I really encourage married couples. So my wife and I do a lot of pre-marriage counseling, and we are always encouraging couples at the beginning of their marriage or almost marriage. Don't let yourselves go when you get married. Work to try to maintain your physical appearance. We live in a broken world. Everybody gets older. Things start to spread out and sag. It's going to happen to all of us sooner or later. But you don't want to let yourself go and just say, well, who cares? Sex is a guarantee. You do want to try to work on your appearance. I want my wife to think I'm attractive. Some of you might think that's impossible, but I'd like to do the best I can. She married me and you didn't, so she already signed off on that to some extent. But I want to be concerned that she would find me attractive, and so I don't want to just let myself go. But having said that, that is not a fix for pornography. As true as what I just said is that you need to take responsibility for your appearance and not let yourself go, if your husband is struggling with pornography, there's nothing you can do with regard to your appearance to fix it. Because husbands don't look at porn because they are not attracted to their wives. That's not why they look at porn. Most women misunderstand this. So if you're a woman here, really hear me well. Because here's what's happened. I've had this conversation 100,000 times. Wife says, I can't have sex with him anymore after this porn thing because he clearly thinks I'm ugly. And he's going, baby, I don't think you're ugly. Well, if you don't think I'm ugly, then why are you looking at all these women online? And a wife wrongly thinks that her husband's looking to women on porn is a reflection of what he thinks about her appearance. And that's not it. Really, husbands are telling the truth when they say, I am attracted to you, and I also looked at porn. And you will understand how both of those things can be true when you understand the nature of lust. The logic of lust is, I want more. That's what lust is. Lust says, I need the next thing. Lust is not content with what you've been given. It wants what it doesn't have. And so this is why, so you young guys here and you young gals, hear me out on this one. Everybody thinks, I'm young, I'm tempted sexually, maybe I'm struggling with porn, maybe I'm not struggling with porn, but I struggle with masturbation, or maybe I struggle with going too far with my boyfriend or girlfriend. And what is happening is we'll get married and we'll have all the sex you can have and it'll fix the problem. And it will not. If you are, the greatest predictor of porn use and unfaithfulness in marriage is whether or not you have been chaste outside of marriage. If your boyfriend or your girlfriend is pushing lines with you right now before you're married, that's the greatest predictor that they'll be sexually immoral when you get married. Because lust wants what it doesn't have. And you think that once you're together and having sex, it'll fix it. But what happens is once you're married, now they've got you. But what does lust want? Lust wants what it doesn't have. So the honeymoon will be a blast. But before long, you'll start wanting what you don't have because that's the way lust works. And so a woman can be absolutely beautiful in her husband's eyes, and he will still want what he doesn't have if he's nurturing lust. And so a wife can't think her appearance is responsible for her husband's porn. It is not, because it cannot be, because that's not the way the human soul works. Lust works by wanting more. And so the way to fix it for a wife is not with a different hairstyle or with weight loss or with different makeup or with different clothes or with more exciting sexual experiences. The way to fix it is by nurturing a heart of contentment in a man who's pleased with what the Lord has given him and is fighting any kind of lust.
That's a good answer. How do you forgive in the face of such pain? How do you forgive, and what does forgiveness look like?
So the first thing you have to say about forgiveness is that you have to do it. You have to forgive. I don't know stories in this room, but I know the stories exist. I just don't know what they are. In my experience, most of my counseling experience is marriage counseling. Most of the marriage counseling I've done has been counseling in the aftermath of betrayal, either adultery or pornography. And just to be very candid with you, in my experience, the most challenging experience in counseling is helping a wife forgive after that kind of betrayal. Wives cheat too, and wives look at pornography too. But it is often a significant challenge for wives to forgive in the aftermath of that betrayal. And you need to settle it right now that you have to forgive. And the reason you have to forgive is because Jesus says so. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 18 that you must forgive your brother from the heart. I think that's the most controversial teaching in the Bible. I do. That will get people who've been victimized more upset than just about anything that you could say. Because what it feels like to them is they were wronged by this jerk over here, and now you're giving them something to do. And the problem with it is the root of that is pride as well. I have never known somebody who refused to forgive and was humble. That is to say, you show me somebody who refuses to forgive, and I will show you somebody who is only thinking about the other person's sin and not thinking at all about their sin. When you understand that you swim in an ocean of forgiving grace, that Jesus Christ has forgiven every single sin that you could ever commit, that you have ever commit, and that you will ever commit, Jesus forgives you of that. When you are focused on that, then you'll be able to spare little thimbles of forgiving grace for other people, because nobody can ever sin against you as much as you have sinned against the Lord of heaven and earth. And so we've got to nurture a heart of humility here, and you have to forgive. I think what forgiveness looks like is, I think we can forgive and still be frustrated. I think we can forgive and still be distrustful. I think we can forgive and still have questions about what the future looks like, because forgiveness doesn't describe how we feel. It's a promise that we make. So when I say I forgive you to somebody, I'm promising not to dwell on this in my own mind. I'm promising that when I start to think about what you did and how you looked at pornography and how you did it maybe for years and didn't tell me, I'm promising to make it my responsibility to deal with that. One of the things I'm doing in counseling all of the time is helping women and men know how to do that. When you start to get on the ramp of stewing about what your spouse did to you, that right there is the alarm that you have to go to the Lord in prayer and say, Lord, forgive me. I promised I would forgive. I'm tempted not to do that. Would you give me grace to forgive my spouse? And I'm helping couples think about 4, 5, 6 things about their spouse that are wonderful that they can remember in those times of weakness. Because it doesn't matter how much porn your spouse is looking at, doesn't matter what kind of adulterous situation they were in, you married them, and so there are things about them that you love. There are things about them that are good. And so I'm saying, hey, let's make a list of what those things are, and let's go to that list when I'm tempted to get upset. So I'm not gonna think about the fact that my wife cheated on me. Lord, give me grace to think about what a great mom she is. Give me grace to think about what a great daughter she's been. I mean, maybe she's got a wonderful relationship with her parents and she's so serving of them. Give me grace to think about how funny she is. And so I'm just going through that list, and if you really think on that hard, you'll be in a different place when you've rehearsed that list than you were at the beginning. So forgiveness is a promise not to dwell on it in my mind. And if you can fight that war well, you're on track to do the other two things well. Secondly, it's a promise that I'm not going to bring it up to you to hurt you with it. So I'm promising that the next time we get in an argument, I'm not going to say things like, well, I'm not the one who was looking at porn. You were. Well, hold on now. You said I forgive you, and you just threw that right in my face. And forgiveness is a promise that you won't do that. And then forgiveness in the third instance is a promise that I'm not going to bring it up to other people. So I'm not going to go out to breakfast with the girls and say, well, do you know how much porn he's looking at? Jerk. You're damaging him and his reputation, and that's an evidence that you haven't forgiven him. So I think that's the 3 battles that we want to fight on as far as what forgiveness looks like. And the last thing I would say about that is, some of you in here right now either are or will meet people who don't need to be worried about forgiveness right then because they've got a spouse who is unrepentant and they're looking at porn. And so if you've got a spouse that's doing whatever they want to do and they don't care what you think and they're looking at porn, your first job is not to fight to forgive them. Your first job is to confront them with their sin and call them to repentance. And once they're repentant, then we talk about forgiveness. But forgiveness isn't the first thing we do in every situation, particularly with unrepentant people.
Let me just, because this is powerful, just really quickly. So forgiveness is 3 things. One is we promise not to dwell on it. 2 is we promise not to.
2, you recite positive things about them. You change your way of thinking.
That's just one of the things that I do to help people not dwell on it, but to think about something else. So first it's I won't dwell on the sin, but I'll dwell on good things about you. Second is I'm not going to bring it up to you to hurt you with it. And third is I won't bring it up to other people.
Yeah. Thank you. That's powerful.
So many women, in an attempt to not be hurt again, will be constantly picking up the cell phone, browsing through the history, will be looking over their husband's shoulders to, is he looking at somebody? You write in your book that this is actually can be more damaging to the marriage.
So they become the police officer.
Yeah. How is this so? And what would you recommend that they do instead?
Yeah. So I really strongly encourage women that in the aftermath of a discovery that your husband has been looking at porn, that you not be the person who's investigating, that's being his accountability partner. You don't want to be the person that's asking him the hard questions, that's looking at the accountability reports. That is a really bad idea. Many women want to do it. Many women say, well, I'm the accountability partner, and I got a bunch of questions I'm going to ask you, and you're going to answer every single last one of them. And one of the things that my wife and I, when we do counseling with couples like this, one of the things we're doing is we're calling women off of that. And I think what women want in that is they felt betrayed and they want to try to recover some knowledge and some control that they've lost during that period of deception. The reason it doesn't work is because you've got to be a wife to your husband. And you cannot be a wife to your husband if you are the private investigator, if you're the police officer that's trying to find the next crime. The reality is that it will warp your marriage if you and your husband start to see it as your responsibility to be kind of lurking around and try to catch him messing up. Women think, I've heard so many women say, well, I just can't trust him, so I have to see the accountability reports. But what I'm always telling women is, if you're the one who's investigating his internet history, you're not learning to trust your husband, you're learning to trust the results of your investigation. And so it will it just increases your suspicion. It just increases your doubt, and it will make the restoration of your marriage that much harder. So what do? Somebody needs to be asking your husband questions. Somebody needs to be looking at his internet history. It just doesn't need to be you. And so what we do when we're helping couples who are dealing with this is we ask the couple to agree on a third person who would be the accountability partner for the offending spouse. That person is the one, sometimes it's me, but a lot of times my schedule doesn't permit me to be that sort of point person. But whoever they agree on, that person is the one who's getting the accountability reports. That person is the one who's meeting regularly and asking the hard questions. And we have an arrangement where that third party is available to the spouse who's been offended. And they're free to say encouraging things. When you see him at church, say, hey, I want you to know your husband's rocking it. He's being awesome. Like, you should really be encouraged. The Lord is changing him. That's really encouraging for a wife to hear that from somebody outside of the marriage. If a wife has suspicions that something's going on with her husband, hey, first thing you do is talk to your husband about that. Hey, babe, you came to bed really late last night. When you struggled with porn before, you were always up really late. Like, what's going on with that? If she's not satisfied with the answer that she gets from that, then she has freedom to go to that third party and say, hey, here's what he's doing. I'm concerned. Can you help out here? So the wife needs to know that someone is doing it, and she needs to know that she has access to that person if she needs help. But she should not be the person who's the sort of police officer.
Last question before we switch to parenting. The hardest conversation I think that we have and we've had is also with that wife. Man, it's tough. And sometimes we get a wife to, come in and it's like, all right, that's my grounds for divorce. In your opinion, is pornography grounds for divorce? And what would you say to these women who, that's it, I'll never trust them again, I'm ready to leave?
So in some ways, the answer to the question depends on, because different people have different views of divorce, and then even within, after you've decided on your view of divorce and remarriage, then not all porn problems are created equal. Some people, I've done counseling with people who their struggle with pornography looks like indulging in pornography every couple of months. Some people it's every couple of weeks. Some people it's every day. Some people, I've done counseling with some guys who are in deep, and they can't imagine going 4 hours, spending a day where they don't spend 4 hours looking at porn. So, there's a spectrum of problems. In general, I would say, no, pornography is not a reason for divorce. And my own perspective, I would just say, no, porn isn't a reason for divorce. Certainly not initially, even if you have a different perspective on divorce and remarriage than what a lot of us have, I would still say we're not ready to make that decision in the early days or even in the early weeks. Most of the time when wives say that, or when husbands say, actually I've never heard a husband say it. I've heard wives say it. I've never heard a husband say it. But when wives say that, most of them don't even mean they want a divorce. They mean, I'm really frustrated with you, and I am trying to communicate to you that you better fix this, and you better fix it quick, because I can't do this. That's what they're trying to communicate. And I think if we can kind of parse through the sort of headline of divorce, ! We can kind of get a little further than just... So no, I don't think it is. And I think what we need to do is address the real urgent concerns that wives have rather than sort of entertain that possibility.
Thank you. I'd like to switch to parenting and some open questions concerning parents and children, not just in relation to pornography, some other issues. So very often parents hear about this talk that they're supposed to have with the children. And even the children or the teens will have your parents have they had D-talk with you? And so what is D-talk, and what do you say in D-talk with your children?
Yeah. So my own recommendation, and I don't purport to have all this figured out. Our oldest is 9, so there's all kinds of things that I'm certain we will talk about that we have not talked about yet. But my wife and I spent a lot of time thinking about this and reading about this and talking with people who've got teenagers and kids in their 20s and 30s, people that we trust, and just said, hey, what did you do? And our own conviction is that we're not waiting for the talk. What we're trying to do is just live out a commitment to have, to talk about anything that our kids bring up in a way that is calm and age appropriate. So we want to create a culture in our family that if you want to talk about something, dad and mom are the best place to come for answers. I just don't want to say, I don't want to talk about that right now, because a kid's going to go find out about it. So I want our kids to know that the best place they can go for answers is me and their mother. Now that commitment has had me in conversations that I'd rather not be in, honestly. I'm sitting here with a 6-year-old wondering, feeling like I slipped into the twilight zone, wondering how in the name of heaven and earth I'm talking about this particular thing with this little girl, big blue eyes blinking at me. But I think that's the commitment you've got to have. And the reality is the idea for the talk was formed decades ago when parents had much more control over what their parents saw or what their kids saw. There wasn't an internet. So if you wait till, sometimes the magic age for people who want to wait and have the talk, sometimes it's like 12 or 13 or 14. Well, listen, if the average age of porn exposure is 11, there's too much water that's gone under the bridge. Your kids will be having the talk with you, So I think we just need to have a commitment that I'm going to have a calm, age-appropriate conversation. I do feel certain if we're trying really hard to keep our kids protected from pornography. We're doing everything we know to do. And I'm certain that at some point we will have some kind of body part conversation. But right now we're just trying to be open and honest and let our kids know, hey, if you got questions, we got answers.
How do you respond, and what action should a parent take when they've found out that their child has viewed pornography?
Yeah. So that's going to happen. Your kid will see pornography. If they haven't already, it's going to happen. If the statistic is 11, that means some kids are a little bit older. That means some kids are a little bit younger when they see it. I saw porn for the first time when I was 8 years old. Oh my goodness. Your kids are going to see it. And I think when your kids see it, first of all, if you find out that they've seen it, you will be uncommonly blessed. Because the worst case scenario is that they'd see it and be looking at it and you would never know. You would stumble upon some evidence of it maybe 2 years after they started looking at it or something like that. So hopefully you will find out. And I think the response to that is, first of all, I think we need to be calm about it. A lot of parents are tempted to freak out. I've talked with people who one of the scariest experiences they had was after dad found out they were looking at porn and they were screaming and cussing and yanking of the computer out of the wall, and that just didn't help. That just was like, okay, well, this is not something dad is a good guy to talk about. with here. So I think we need a calm response. I think we need to hear out our kids. James 1:19 says, "Let every person be quick to hear and slow to speak." Proverbs 18:13 says, "The one who gives an answer before he hears a matter is folly. It's folly and shame to him." So if you want to be foolish, start speaking before you've listened. I think we're interested in how our kids found this. We ought to be interested in what they thought about it. Maybe they were grossed out about it. Maybe they thought it was incredible and wonderful. I mean, we need to know what we're dealing with so that we don't start trying to fix a problem they don't have. I think all that's important. I think the most important conversations that you'll have with your kids, though, are the conversations you have before they see it. So they're going to see it, and you just have to live your life in your home with that expectation. And what we are doing, the conversations we're having, just preparing for this, we're having conversations about two things. One is modesty. So modesty in our home with a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 9-year-old, modesty in our home gives us an opportunity to talk about pornography without talking about pornography. This gets back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Like we've looked at impure things way before we see hardcore pornography. And so we just have a maxim in our house that we don't look at immodest men and we don't look at immodest women. We don't look at immodest people. This takes work on our part. It means we plan which mall entrance we go into. But I mean, if you go to the mall, you know the underwear stores that aren't so secret, even though secret's in the title. We just the one down the street from us at the mall, there are, 15-foot posters of half-naked women hanging in them, that if the woman was walking around on the street dressed like that, she'd be arrested for indecent exposure. But you can blow up the picture to 500% her normal size and hang it in the window, and somehow that's cool. So we just don't go in that entrance, and our kids know. In fact, we were walking in a different mall entrance one time, and I looked behind me, and our son, who was about 7 at the time, he had a hoodie on, and it was pulled closed with just this little, and he was like bumping into Carson. I'm like, "Carson, what are you doing?" And he's like, "There's an immodest woman in that window over there." And I looked, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, there isn't. I need a hoodie," you know? So we're just saying, hey, we don't look at immodest people. So we're trying to really lower the bar. It's not we're trying to avoid porn. We're trying to avoid immodesty. So we're careful about which pools we go to. We don't go to pools that have a reputation of having really scantily clad women and men. We go to the pool that we go to is down the street from us, and it's a really family-friendly thing with parents who aren't trying to get all decked out and show everything they've got at the pool. So we're talking about modesty, so that our kids are just alert. They're more sensitive about nudity than waiting to see nudity. They're sensitive when they saw something immodest and they're talking to us about it. And then the second thing that we are talking about is we're talking about the gospel all of the time. Because if what I said at the beginning is true, that pornography is powerful, and if you're going to change and not look at it, you have to find something more powerful than porn. And if that's the gospel, and it is, then I want to connect the dots to the resources that our kids are going to need to overcome the temptation of pornography. And so one day, I don't know when it'll be, it's just one of the most horrifying thoughts I have as a parent. Every night I go into our kids' rooms after they're asleep and I pray for them. I pray several different things for each one of them, but one thing I pray for all three of them is I'm aware that our culture would have my little girl believe that she matters if she will act like a whore. And I just can't stand it. And I'm aware that our culture wants my boys to be ensnared with pornography. And I'm praying over them every night, Lord, would you protect them from this? Would you give them a heart for purity? But I know one day they're going to be confronted with it. And that's going to be a day when I'm not around, and the internet filters that we have on all our devices, they're not going to be there because they're not going to be in our house probably. And they're going to be able to look at it, and they're going to be tempted. And maybe the only person that'll be there will be the Lord, because he's everywhere. And the only thing they'll have to resist that temptation will be the gospel of God's grace. And so we've got to be parents that are talking to our kids about the gospel, the power of Jesus Christ to protect us from sin, the power of Jesus Christ to save us from sin. And so, I mentioned a few things that I think we need to do in the aftermath of finding out our kid's been looking, but I just really want to encourage parents, let's talk about those two things starting now and be able to connect some dots back to that after we find out.
The next question is really dangerous. Last night when we had a forum at the North Campus, I asked without knowing your answer, but man, I risked, because there's all kinds of people will say all kinds of things. But as a parent, what do you tell your kids about masturbation? What's your approach on that?
Well, I haven't told my kids anything about masturbation right now. Hey, kids, you want to talk about masturbation? There's something about that word that kills me. I don't know what it is, but there it is. So, so there is a spectrum on this topic in Christian circles. There are some Christians who argue that masturbation is God's gift to teenagers. And that's a quote. They say masturbation is God's gift to teenagers. We don't want our kids having sex, so really we're thankful to the Lord for masturbation. And that's wrong. That's wrong, because masturbation is a sin. And the reason masturbation is a sin is for a bunch of reasons, but two reasons is that you can't masturbate without lusting. So in order to be successful, you must lust to masturbate. And so Jesus weighs in on that. He says, as soon as you look at a woman to lust, you have committed adultery with her in your heart. The other thing is, there's no such thing in the Bible as the pleasure of sex without your partner in marriage. I mean, just think about it. There's no such thing in the Bible as the pleasure of sex without a spouse. It is a corrupt and sinful culture like ours that creates opportunity to have sexual pleasure without a spouse. But in the Bible, it's not allowed. And so anytime you pursue the pleasure of sex apart from the marriage bed, it is wrong. So on those grounds and about half a dozen more, masturbation is wrong. So it's not God's gift to teenagers. The other end of the continuum in Christian circles is that masturbation is the same as if you went out and committed an act of physical adultery. And that's not true either. So it's a distortion of the passage I quoted in Matthew chapter 5. When you look at a woman to lust, you've committed adultery with her in your heart, but Jesus doesn't say adultery in the heart is the same as actual physical adultery. His point is to say that nobody ever commits physical adultery without first nurturing desires for adultery in the heart. Just like anger. Nobody ever committed a physical act of murder without nurturing anger in their heart. So the two things aren't equivalent to one another. It's just that one leads to the other. And we can't say we're righteous and holy and pure just because we've never committed adultery. We've got to examine what's going on in our hearts. And so people over here just misunderstand that. And so I think if we split the difference, we'll say that masturbation is a sin. Not because it's the same as physical adultery, it's very obviously not, but because it's a sin that pursues sexual pleasure apart from the unity of marriage, and it nurtures lust, and so it's wrong. And so I think that's the kind of conversation we want to have with our kids. And I think that I want to be careful how I say this. I really think parents need to chill out a little bit. And I don't mean chill out. Here's why I want to be careful, because I don't want you to understand chill out like we're not going to make a big deal out of sin. That's not what I mean at all. I hate sin. I don't want to nurture sin in my kid's heart. But so many kids learn, I can't talk to my parent about this because they freak out. I can't talk to my parent about this because they're either going to melt down and like, oh my goodness, my son's asking me about this and I don't want to talk to my son about this. Or they get angry like that dad I mentioned who's like throwing the computer and screaming and cussing. You want to win the long war with your kid. And that means being understanding. That means listening to them. That means saying, son, man, I'm so glad we're talking about this. And by the way, if you have the opportunity to talk about it, you'll be blessed because a lot of parents are going to never know that their kids were doing this. And so if we can nurture the kind of relationship with our kids that they want to tell us they're struggling, or when we discover them doing this, they're willing to have the conversation we start. But I think we need to say, I'm so sorry that this is going on. I want to help you. I want to pray with you about this. We can have a calm and gentle conversation that appreciates this as sinful, but allows opportunities for more conversation later. So that's what I mean by chill out.
Okay. So some parents say, I find internet blockers unnecessary. I don't want to over-shelter my kids. They say that my kids will eventually stumble upon this, and when they do, I will be beside them to tell them the truth or how to view this. What do you say to those parents?
Yeah, I would say please don't do that. I don't mean please don't be beside your kids. I mean please don't think that you don't need to take any action to protect your kids. That would be like saying, we got 25 guns in our house, and the kids are going to find them and shoot one of them off sooner or later, so I'm not going to do anything to stop it because, I'll just be there when they fire the thing. That's completely ridiculous. If something is in your home and is dangerous, you take precautions to protect your kids from it. Pornography, a man I know, he was telling me his story about how he got introduced to pornography. He was in third grade, and his friend said, hey, why don't you come over to my house after school and we'll play? And he knew, this man that I was talking with, he knew that he had to ask his dad and mom about that, so he went home. And he had his friend with him, and he said, hey, Mom, can I go over to Johnny, I don't know what his name was, can I go over to Johnny's house this afternoon? And he said, my mom said yes. And he was amazed by that because his mom never said yes. His mom always said no. If she didn't know the parents, and if she wasn't sure that the parents were going to be there, she always said no. Well, she didn't know this guy's parents, and she wasn't sure they were going to be there, but she said yes for some reason. And so he went over to his house, and his parents weren't there. And this kid took him down in the basement and reached back behind the stairs in the basement and pulled out a shoebox full of his dad's porn magazines. And he said, he opened this magazine up to me, and I saw the first picture, and it was exhilarating. And he felt a way he had never felt before. And he was in the third grade. I don't know how old you are in the third grade. What are you, like 8 or something like that? 8, 9? 9. And he said that started a problem with pornography that would not go away until I was 26 years old. And he said this to me. He said, oh, how I wish my mom had said no that day. And I just thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to remember that to my kids' chagrin until they're out of the house. Now, this was back in a day when there was no such thing as internet and nobody even had computers. But what he was saying is there were things I wanted to do as a little kid that as an adult I wish my mom had just said no to. And that's one story. I could spend the next 2 hours telling you stories just like that. You think about your kids that live in your house. Maybe they're 2, maybe they're 13, maybe they're 15. Don't have your kids saying about you 20, 30, 40 years from now when their life is in tatters. Their wife has walked out on them and their kids think they're a pervert. Don't have your kids saying about you, I wish my dad had put Covenant Eyes on the computer in the basement. Oh, I could have been spared so many years of pain. I wish my dad had done that. Don't do that. That is a reckless decision. It's an easy fix, and it's just baseline responsibility as a parent, I think.
So, very thought-provoking. In public schools, children attend sexual education classes. Would you recommend that our children, or should parents allow their children to attend those classes?
No, I would not recommend that. It's just a really bad idea. And the reason it's a bad idea is because sex is not a neutral thing. So God invented sex, and God has the sole prerogative to be able to define faithful sex and faithless sex and what good sex is and what bad sex is. And by definition, in the public schools, they are not allowed to weigh in on that. And so, forget about the public schools. I would not authorize anybody to have a conversation with my children about sex if they would not first admit the very obvious truth that sex is God's idea, and we have to, if we're going to have a faithful conversation about sex, we have to say about it what God says. Anybody that does not have that sort of entry-level understanding, I would never give permission to talk to my kids about sex.
And just a side note, usually kids get a note from the teacher saying that they're going to be having these type of classes. Sometimes teachers don't. So some parents have to take an initiative.
And sometimes kids don't bring it home.
Yeah, but parents have to take initiative and ask and make a point that their kids don't.
Awesome. Our time is running, but I want to thank my wife. She came up with these questions about spouses and parents, so thank you, honey, for your help. I want to take a couple minutes. There's a lot of home group leaders here, and kids ministry leaders, teen ministry, youth leaders, youth pastor in the house. I want you to talk to them a couple minutes. And so my first question is, if you're a leader and someone comes to you and says, confesses a struggle with pornography, do you just pray with them? Hey, you know what? God bless you, or what steps do you take? What role do you play? How often do you check up with them afterwards?
So first of all, if you're in any kind of spiritual leadership, that could be a parent, that could be a community group leader, that could be a pastor, the most predictable conversation you can plan on having is one about pornography. If I wanted, listen, this is so prevalent. If I wanted to quit every single thing I'm doing and do nothing but meet every day, all day long with people who are struggling with pornography, I could do it. That could be my entire ministry. The people that help me with my schedule tell me that they spend more time telling people no when they write in to ask to meet with me about their porn struggle than almost any other thing we have to say no to, because it's an overwhelming flood of people that need help. So this is a conversation that you're going to have. And so if you're going to be faithful as a parent, if you're going to be faithful as a home group leader, if you're going to be faithful as a pastor, you have to figure out some wisdom about how you're going to have a conversation, and in fact, a set of conversations with people who are struggling. I wrote the Finally Free book for two people. I wrote it for people who are struggling with pornography and need help, and so I wrote it so that they could pick up the book and go through it and have some guidance about what to do. The second person that I wrote the book for is the people we're talking about. People who know that pornography is a problem, people who are being approached by folks that have a problem, but they don't know what to say. And so I wrote the book. The book is ideally used, somebody who's struggling and somebody who's helping, reading it together. But I would just encourage people in ministry, if you don't read my book, get some knowledge somewhere about how to help people. just for the purposes of our conversation here, I would, the general guidance I would give for it can't be just a prayer and see you later, hope everything turns out okay. That's like one of the worst things you could do. You do need to pray with them. But you need to remind them of the hope and the power for change that's available in the gospel. You need to be able to show them very practically how they can begin to take steps to get out of this problem. And in my book, I give 8 different strategies, 8 steps to take to get out of the struggle. One thing that I always do in my first meeting with somebody who comes to meet with me about this is I tell them, so if you remember from this morning, the short, easy battle, I tell people that within 6 hours of you leaving here, I want to get an email from Covenant Eyes letting me know that you have signed up for it and that I'm your accountability partner. In fact, mostly, what I'm doing now is I'm saying we're figuring out who their accountability partner is going to be, because a lot of times I'm not able to function in that role effectively, just for reasons of schedule, not because I don't want to. But for reasons of schedule, we need somebody else that's going to kind of be the main point person on accountability. But I want to get a forward from them that they're the accountability partner and that they're going to be following up with you on a weekly basis about what you're looking at. So that's the first 6 hours. I mean, you can have your access to pornography generally sealed off in an afternoon. And so I think baseline faithfulness in these kinds of conversations is, hey, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, let's get this thing cut off and really begin to deal with the problem.
Wanted to ask a little bit, one more question to that. So we believe in this, you got to keep confessions a secret. What if a teenager comes and confesses that they're struggling? Would you go to a teen's parents and tell them, talk to them, approach them about that?
Yeah. I think you have to do that, not for any necessarily legal reason, but a teen's parents are the people who have been charged before God as the people who have responsibility to bring this child up in the fear and instruction of the Lord. So I think you need to do that. More important than whether you do it or not is how you do it. And so the worst thing you could do would be to have a 13-year-old come up to you and say, hey, I'm struggling with pornography. And you say, okay, and maybe you say some good things, but then 2 days later, their mother comes into the kitchen and says, I just got off the phone with Pastor Russell, and he said you're looking at porn. That's a tragedy. Don't do that. I think as part of your ongoing conversation with this person who's struggling is to talk about how they could bring their parents in on this. The best way to inform their parents is for you not to be the one to do it, but for you to be the one encouraging them about how to bring their parents in. We want to nurture an atmosphere of trust. And when we got people talking about each other behind their back, even if it's something noble like telling a parent, there's just a more honestly straightforward way to do that. So we do need to bring parents in the loop, but we just need to do that in a wise way. An exception to that would be the obvious exception where the parent is part of the trouble. So, I just, right before I left Louisville, I finished counseling with a guy who, he got introduced to porn because his dad was hooking him up, anytime he wanted porn, even as an 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, his dad showed him porn when he was 4 initially. And any porn he wanted, his dad would go get it for him. And so obviously, we're not talking to that guy as far as informing him. We might see if there's something we could do to help dad think differently about this. So except in the obvious exceptions like that, we want to try to find a way to bring parents in the loop.
If someone comes to you and you're counseling them, they're sorrowful about porn use, but they don't want to take radical steps to change. What do you say to them or to their spouses?
I think we have to challenge them about their sorrow. So, the Bible says that there's sorrow and then there's sorrow. The Bible says there's godly sorrow and there's worldly sorrow. In 2 Corinthians 7, the Apostle Paul says that there is godly sorrow that leads to life, and there's worldly sorrow that leads to death. And essentially, he gives 7 indicators about the difference between worldly sorrow that kills you and godly sorrow that saves you. And a couple of the relevant indicators for the question you're asking is godly sorrow is earnest to be clear from the sin. It's earnest, it's diligent, and it wants to be clear. It wants to clear yourself from sin. And so if you say you are sad, but you don't want to do anything to be clear of the sin, then I believe you that you're sad. But you just have a kind of sorrow that will lead to death. It will kill you. You have worldly sorrow. You're sad because you don't want to lose your junk. You don't want to lose your reputation. You don't want to lose your job. You don't want to lose your friends. You don't want to have your parents think you're a pervert. You don't want to have your wife think you're a pervert, or your husband, or whatever. And that is a sorrow over the wrong thing. Instead of being sad over offending Jesus Christ, you're sad that people might know the truth about you. And so I would say, hey, you're sad, but you're sad in a way that is lethal. And you need to repent of worldly sorrow and ask God for grace to have godly sorrow that would seek to bring this out in the open and really be earnest to deal with it.
Last question that I'd like to ask for leaders. We live in a community or in a world where people get offended really easily. And so we have to be kind of careful, because people say, oh, you've offended me, and then slam the door and leave. And so people will be okay if you confront them about pornography, but, they're liking pictures on Facebook and Instagram. Now, I haven't figured out on Instagram how to see what pictures people have liked, but sometimes my wife will show me, hey, look at these pictures that this person is liking. They're really inappropriate. Should leaders be challenging people about those things, or is pornography, again, just, well, I guess we can't talk about that, or what would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think we should be responding to that. So if we only shouldn't be responding to that, if the only bad thing you can look at is porn. If the only bad thing you can look at is porn, then anything goes. But there's a lot worse things than pornography. We should be challenging people whenever they're wrong. That's not some hostile bad thing. That's a good thing. In Genesis chapter 6, it says, if one is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should rebuke him in a spirit of gentleness. In Luke 17:3, Jesus says, if your brother sins, go and show him his fault. I mean, it's pretty clear. I mean, what that means in the Greek is that if your brother sins, you should go and show him his fault. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So if somebody's doing something wrong, we go to him and we talk to him about it. The thing that's going to keep that from feeling like we're in a church where everybody's breathing down our neck is when we do what Galatians says in chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, where it says to do it in a spirit of gentleness. So I've got to cultivate gentleness, not sort of like mob, cop, you're under arrest. But if I can come to you, in other words, let's say you like a picture on Facebook where everybody's at the beach and they're wearing bikinis, I can go to you and I can be like, you horrible, immodest Christian. I'm disgusted at that picture on Facebook that you like, and I am ashamed that you are in our church, and all the rest. I mean, nobody's doing that. Maybe they are, I don't know. But you can do it like that.
You don't know some men in our community.
You can do it like that kind of harsh rebuke. Or you can go up to people in a gentle way. One of the ways to be gentle is to ask questions first. So this is This is, again, what we talked about before. Let every person be quick to hear and slow to speak. So one of the best ways to bring that up is say, hey, I saw on Facebook the other night that you liked this picture with those girls on the beach. What did you think about that? Every time I do that, people condemn themselves without me having, oh, well, I know that they were really immodest, weren't they? It's like, well, yeah, they were, and it made me wonder why you were doing that. So honestly, if you give people the rope, they'll kind of hang themselves a little bit, But if you just listen, a lot of times that will give you the way in. And then I have found that another way to be gentle, besides just asking questions, once you pass the asking question part and you're into the sort of talking part, is if you can talk about lessons that you have learned. And so talk about your own weaknesses and say, for example, I'm trying to think because I made up this example about the girls on the beach, and I don't have an experience like that because I've never worn a bikini on the beach. So I don't know but if you can just kind of say, if you could express concern about them, I was just concerned because, gosh, when I think about the importance in the Bible on sexual purity and modesty, maybe that's not the best kind of stuff to be liking. I think there's all kinds of ways that we can be gentle and calm and not harsh and cruel. So, yeah, I think we do have to talk about those things, but I just think more importantly is how we talk about them.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Lambert. We're going to get you back up on the stage in a couple minutes. What we'd like to switch to is a little bit technology. What's interesting is Dr. Lambert teaches us at Theological Seminary, and every one of their professors, the computers that they're given to use, professors who teach at a seminary, every one of their computers is connected through Covenant Eyes. Their programs run through their internet browsers, run through Covenant Eyes. And there would be a question, well, if you're a professor, shouldn't, be past that moment of temptation? Why would you need that? But in all honesty, when you look at our society, I don't know the statistic and I don't want to discuss it, but in one of the major cities in the U.S., in the last 2-3 years, there was like 4 or 5 mega churches in that city, and every one of those mega church pastors stepped down because of issues related to sexual immorality. And it's almost as you're always hearing pastors, families, issues where they're caught at the point of adultery, but even that those kind of things start much earlier. And I think every one of us in every home need to be very, very proactive, especially when it comes to technology. And so we are super excited that Covenant Eyes is with us today, and the representative, Sam Black. Covenant Eyes is one of the most reputable organizations today in America that is found as a Christian organization, but their main purpose is to help families and equip families to protect their technology, so that they can still use their technology as it's meant to be used and not allow Satan to use that to just creep into our homes. We are super excited Covenant Eyes is with us. Recently, I just read that Covenant Eyes, Google, they used to allow pornographic companies to advertise through Google. And Covenant Eyes and several others went to Google and say, hey, listen, this is what porn is. And after their conversation, after their meetings, Google made a statement, came out that from now on, we will not allow pornographic companies to advertise through Google. And Covenant Eyes played a very significant role in that decision. And so we are so excited that Covenant Eyes is here. I know me and my wife, we've used a different program, but after this weekend, we're switching to Covenant Eyes, and we want you and your families to switch to Covenant Eyes. We really believe in this importance. At our North Campus, and I don't know if I can say this at South Campus, I'll say this, we said it at our North Campus. Very soon, if you don't have Covenant Eyes in your home, our kids will not be allowed to visit your home. We're just going to make it a rule. I'm kind of over-exaggerating, but it's so important. If the kids are going to go somewhere and there's no Covenant Eyes on their computers, you don't know what they're going to see or what they're going to do. There's no way that you can control what they're going to access on the computers. And so we were super excited that Covenant Eyes is here. We're going to see a minute video about Covenant Eyes, and then we will have a short conversation here with Sam Black. Then at the end, we'll have Dr. Lambert back up here. We'll have Pastor Vasily back up here, and we will conclude. So, short video about Covenant Eyes.
Did you know that 90% of boys and 70% of girls are exposed to pornography online? Meanwhile, 71% of kids say that they're hiding internet activity from their parents. In 56% of divorce cases today, a major contributing factor is one spouse's continued use of inappropriate content online. What are you doing to protect your family online? Covenant Eyes Internet Accountability monitors how the internet is used on your family's mobile devices and their computers. Each web page visited is rated similar to TV shows or video games, like T for teen or M for mature. This information is collected in easy-to-read reports, and as a parent, you can receive weekly reports for your kids. Plus, you can invite your friends to receive reports for your internet activity, which enables you to enjoy the benefits of accountability and protection online as well. These reports provide you with a comprehensive view of how the internet is used in your home. They include information like the videos that are watched and words typed into search engines. Are you looking for additional protection? Covenant Eyes also provides internet filtering, which blocks inappropriate content and limits the amount of time spent online. Install Covenant Eyes on all your devices, your computers, phones, and tablets. There's no extra charge, and we provide free customer support. It's that simple. Sign up today. It's your turn to protect yourself and your family online.
Again, Sam Black, thank you so much for being with us. Go ahead and share a little bit about your company, what you guys do. I think we're ready to take the next step and hear a little bit more about you guys.
Well, thank you so much for having us here, and what an honor to be at a church that is aggressively taking a look at these issues and saying, we're not going to be passive about this, but we're going to take a stand, and we want to make sure we're protecting our kids, and we are going to do the best we can to protect ourselves as adults. So Covenant Eyes was founded in 2000, and it all came about, our founder is Ron DeHaas, and he's a geologist by trade, but always an entrepreneur. And so when he brought the internet home, and I think it was 98, 99, he was like, there is too much inappropriate content online for my sons, and I need to do something about that. And in his church, they practiced accountability on a regular basis. He had people that he answered to, and they were able to ask him tough questions, and he was able to, have an interchange with someone to help him grow and build. And that's what they practiced throughout their whole church. And he said, that's what I want to do with my kids. I want to have a conversation with them so that I'm not, his fear was, if I just put a filter on, well, it'll block stuff, but it won't teach them anything. So my job as a parent is to teach my sons what God desires when they are online. How do they honor God when they are online? And so the very first guiding principle of Covenant Eyes is to honor God. And everything that we do, all the work that we pursue, has that tenet at its very basis. So, let me walk through just a couple of things. Go ahead and show that one slide I asked you to show. You'll pretty soon in my slide you'll say, wait, he's on number 5 already. Did he forget how to count? But Dr. Lambert did such a good job of explaining these issues that I'm gonna spare you the first part, and we're gonna get right down to the nitty-gritty about what you can do, especially as a parent. First, you need to learn. You simply don't know what you don't know. And that's a big deal today because the internet is ever changing. Websites, I think it's 2 websites every minute are being launched. Well, how do you keep up with that as a parent? What are the apps that are out there? Do you know the apps that your kids use on their phones and devices? So there's some training that needs to be going on, and it's very, very tempting for parents to say, I don't really know what to do, and they end up doing nothing. The vast majority of devices and computers that our kids have access to in our culture today have no filtering, no accountability, nothing on them whatsoever. And it's very important as parents to say, that's not good enough, especially as a Christian parent. We need to step up and say, it's my responsibility as a parent. The Bible instructs me to raise them up in the way they should go, and they'll not soon depart from it. Lead by example. Are you asking your sons and daughters to walk in purity, but you're not? Or do you show yourself as an example of purity? Do you go out of your way to show your kids that, yes, I'm going to be accountable for what I do online, because that matters, because they're going to watch what you do. They're going to listen.
I'm just going to share a quick example here.
Yeah.
So we have something on our computer, and one time I searched Chick-fil-A in Washington. I wanted to find a Chick-fil-A in Washington. My wife called me. I can't believe you're searching for chicks. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm searching for chicks. Yeah, you're searching for chicks online. And she was joking to me because she saw that I searched for Chick-fil-A, but it gave her an email right away saying, hey, your husband searched for a chick online. But that's an example. I have it in my, and I think everyone needs to have it in their, especially if they have children. It needs to be there as an example.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Go to the next, back to the slide again. So, install accountability software on all your computers and mobile devices. Now, let's make sure we understand the difference between accountability and filtering. I would compare filtering to a fence. It's very good at keeping young kids in, but teens and adults will walk around the fence and they'll knock on the fence until they find a loose board, or they'll find an open gate and they'll go through that. And then that becomes the secret place where they go and pursue pornography. With accountability, every time you knock on the fence, it goes on a report, and that report is then sent to your parent or to your accountability partner. So the idea is that if we can handle these small things when they're just knocking on the fence, we get to solve small issues before they become big. If your child is curious about sex and that gets blocked by the filter, well, that will appear on our Covenant Eyes report so that you can have a conversation with your child. Says, I noticed you were looking for sex online, so what makes you curious about that? And this is for real, right? We really need to talk about these issues with our kids. And you're going to find a lot of things they're curious about, especially at younger ages, because they just naturally go, Google knows everything. I'll just go ask them.
So, let me be practical here. Do you have a phone?
Yeah.
Can you take it out?
Sure.
So, I know you're telling us to have it. It's your phone. You have it protected.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So, on my phone, everything that I do is monitored, and that report goes to my wife as well as to a board member at my church who's also my hunting buddy and my chief challenger in life. He's the one we build each other up. We encourage each other. We assign each other passages of scripture to read, and we find good articles on building our prayer life, and so we'll send those back and forth to each other, and that's encouraging to me, because when I'm weak, even if I was weak and I'm sitting in front of my computer, literally, in a sense, he's sitting right beside me, right? And the other part is I get to say to my son, this is probably the biggest deal. Really, this is a big deal. You can't
And how
overstress
old is your
this.
son?
My son's 13, but he's grown up with accountability. It's fantastic that he's had that opportunity, I think. But he understands that what Dad does online goes to Brian. And he shares that with another guy. He's open with his life to another man that I know he can recognize him as a Christian, strong Christian man. And I think that's really valuable, that he gets to see that lived out in front of him. Now, that means a lot because now he's had that opportunity, his reports, even though he uses the same devices as the rest of our family, our computers, etc., his reports come to me and my wife. And he can have a very real sense that he can come to us and ask about anything, and he has.
Let me ask you just a little bit. I noticed you have an iPhone, and our people like iPhones. Most of their kids have iPhones too.
Yeah.
So what Covenant Eyes offers is an app called Covenant Eyes.
Right.
So instead of Safari, what you use for internet access, you use Covenant Eyes,
Yeah,
which is just like Safari.
Right. In fact, I'll walk through that in a little bit, but let me hit just two more things. So, one, if you have kids, have a filter, have accountability, because the most important thing, that's the teaching tool. Filter is going to block that content. I'm not filtered. I can go anywhere I want to online, but I'm held accountable for what I do. But my son's not quite at the age where he can be without a filter because he can make mistakes. And I want to do my best I can to prevent that mistakes. My daughter is 17, and this year, on her 17th birthday, I said, honey, I'm going to take your filter off, and you're going to be held accountable. We had that conversation. And, we make it her responsibility to keep her devices clean. And so she has an iPhone too, and I'll explain how I set it up for her and my son and what that kind of looks like. What I found in general purposes, if you use the internet intentionally, it's going to be a pretty rare experience. It can be a rare experience with today's technology, especially if you turn Google Safe Search on. If you don't have Google Safe Search automatically turned on, turn it on. Google does a great job of just keeping the random junk, if you turn that on, from coming into your searches. So use Google Search with Covenant Eyes, and I'll show you, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So only buy mobile devices that can be monitored with software. There's miscellaneous cheap devices or things that don't have very much market share or whatever. If you can't monitor it, don't buy it. I don't care if it's the best-selling product in the world. If they've said no to any parental restrictions and downloading accountability software, find another device. There's plenty out there to choose from, so choose selectively. And again, have meaningful conversations on a regular basis. So go to the next slide. And one more. So the first issue is to learn, right? We said the big issue we got to do here is learn. So, right, let's read this, finally free. And Covenant Eyes provides a very wide selection. We probably have 15 books where you can learn about the issues facing your family online. So everything from adult who is struggling with pornography, well, what is the neuroscience behind that? Why is there a craving for that? And why do people, you actually teach your brain and create neural pathways with repetition. When you practice sin, it's kind of like if you put junk in, you should expect to get junk out, right? Well, that's basically what brain science is. You're actually teaching your brain to do things that you shouldn't do. You're learning to practice sin. We were talking earlier about, well, what if you found your son or daughter viewing pornography? How do you handle that? Well, we've done the research, we've talked to the counselors, and we've created scripts for you to have that conversation so you don't have to guess and go, boy, I just don't know what to do, but I'm just going to do this. Well, we've done the research to help guide you through that. What does it look like to be in an accountability relationship? There's a great book called Coming Clean, and it really talks about gospel-centered accountability and what that looks like. It examines why, for a lot of the time, accountability relationships fail. There was a movement many years ago where guys would enter into these accountability relationships and they have these little check marks thing. I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and you have to answer these. And at the end, it was, well, did you lie about anything you just told me? Well, if I lied to you about all the other stuff, I'm definitely going to lie to you at the end. So it's just kind of like keeping this repetition of lying going. And so what this ebook does, it actually walks you through those pillars of what true accountability is about and gets rid of the false notions. And it's very gospel-centered. So I can't encourage you enough to read that. So let's move on to the next slide. Oh, for all those ebooks, all you have to do is go to my booth, and there's a sign-up sheet out there. Just put your name and email address, and I'm going to send you an email. I'm not going to spam you, but I'm going to send you an email with some links in it to take you to the specific kinds of books that you say you're interested in. So here's the big deal about software. You need to you go to the Covenant Eyes website, and you sign up, and then you create a username and password for each member of your family. What you're doing is you're creating a report for each person in your family, and so that allows multiple people in your home to use devices but separate their internet history report that we provide to you. Now, the great thing about Covenant Eyes is you can't delete any of your own history. It's stored on our servers. So, the old trick of, well, I'll just go and delete some of the history, well, doesn't happen. So whether you have a mobile phone or computers or whatever you're using, you get to download the software to all those devices, and it'll compile what I do on my iPhone or on my wife's Windows computer or my Macintosh computer. All that goes to that report and shows how I've been using the internet. Step back one more. So this rating scale is really important. How difficult is it? I'm sure that every one of you have at some point or another looked at internet history and thought, boy, this is one confusing mess. Well, what Covenant Eyes does is we actually rate every page on the internet just like you'd see for video games and television shows. So T for teen and MT for mature teen, M for mature, HM for highly mature. And then you get to select as the accountability partner what report you want to see for the person you're holding accountable. So if that's your parent, if that's your child you're holding accountable, or if you're holding another man or woman accountable for how they're using the internet, you select what you want to see. So I want to see, for my son, anything rated teen or higher. And so I select the teen level online. And then I have him filtered as well at mature teen. Now, even though we're using the same devices because we have different usernames and passwords, Covenant Eyes is able to recognize what he's doing online different from what I'm doing online. Does that make sense? And then this report will come to you as often as you choose to receive it. So you can receive it every day, every 3 days, or once a week. I would encourage you once a week is good. That you get this report, and then it reminds you to have a conversation. And whether or not there's anything inappropriate on this or not, let that be a reminder for you to have a conversation with your accountability partner or the person you're holding accountable or your kids. I think it's just really valuable. You're going to find some peace. You're going to also learn what they're curious about. So I set at the teen level because I want to see what is my son interested in. And so he'll get Minecraft videos and things like that on YouTube. And so it'll allow me to have a picture inside his life of what he's just interested in. And that's a pretty valuable tool as a parent, just to know what's going on in their life. You can go to the next slide. So just a little recap. Covenant Eyes provides 2 services. Accountability, which actually rates the pages on the internet. You can have as many partners as you want, accountability partners. You get to customize the report, so you only see what you want to see on the report as an accountability partner, and then they're emailed to you. Oh, here's a great feature, the panic button. So let's say I'm a guy and I'm struggling with temptation. With Covenant Eyes, you can click the panic button and it'll shut off your internet access until you feel stronger. And then you just call one of our toll-free number, one of our customer support reps who are very professional, and they'll turn your internet access back on for you. I mean, that's a really valuable tool, right?
That's awesome.
All right. So we have the apps for.
Can the panic button automatically shut off if they've accessed some website that's, a certain level?
Unfortunately, no. We've often thought, well, could there be an angry eye that comes out, and the eye of Sauron will come out and blur if you look at something inappropriate. So we offer an app for Android, which is also available on Kindle Fire and Kindle Fire HD, iPod, iPad, and iPhone. Now, there's some distinctions here for accountability on these devices. Covenant Eyes on your Windows computer, Macintosh, those are just going to monitor any browsers that are going to be used, and it's going to give a full reporting of how the internet's being used. Now, for Android, it's a little bit different. It's going to monitor the stock browser, and it can monitor, I believe, Dolphin and Skyfire. Now, it's not going to be able to monitor some of the other browsers that you can download. So what you do but what it will do is show you all the apps that have been used and the length of time that they've been used. So if you're an accountability for someone and they've downloaded some other browser to surf the internet, you need to confront them and say, listen, you've got your stock browser, which might be Google Chrome or whatever is on the stock browser on the phone. Why do you need these others? It's just an opportunity for you to hide. And so that's just simply confronting them and saying, here's what we agreed to. I was going to be your accountability partner, and you said you would be open and honest with me, and we'd continue to have this conversation. So with iPad, iPod, and iPhone, it works a little differently. And I have a flyer out there that basically walks you through all the steps of setting it up. And you're going to replace the Safari browser with the Covenant Eyes browser. And we've had this browser out for quite a few years now. You can save your bookmarks and do those kinds of things, etc. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to turn off downloading apps installing apps or deleting apps. So this is what I do with my phone. I cannot install or delete an app without my accountability partner or my vice president, who actually sits across the desk from me at our offices. So he can take my phone and I can say, here, I want to download this app. Now that's pretty restrictive.
So if you want to download a game.
Yeah, if I want to download a game, I've got to ask permission for that.
You got to wait until you go to work.
I've got to wait till I go to work or I meet my partner at church. That's something that I've voluntarily done for myself. Now, that's extra restrictive, but I want to, I recognize that people who are really struggling with pornography, that's what they have to go through, and so I want to do what they have to do. For my son and my daughter, I said, hey, we're going to keep this thing of you've got to learn I want to prepare them for a world that is unfiltered. And so as they're growing up, they're going to have to make decisions that are right and just in God's sight. So they are charged with keeping their phones clean. And so here's the basis of it. They can we go in the settings, set the restrictions, set the parental passcode, and they can download any app they want. Now, this isn't for every parent, and you're going to have to judge where your kids are at. You may say, nope, every time my kids want to download an app, they have to ask me, and that's fair. You're the parent paying for the phone plan, etc. You should be making that choice, not your kids. But for my kids who are 13, I only started with my son when he was 13, and my daughter as well. They can download any app they want, but it has to be a clean app. And if it's not clean apps, then they need to come to me right away and say, hey, Dad, I made a mistake, and I've downloaded this app. Can you help me delete this? So they can download any app, but they can't delete them. So there's always a record of what they've downloaded on their phone. Now, this has worked pretty cool. because my daughter, one of the specific things you have to look out for with apps is that some of them have browsers inside their app. For instance, Kick Messenger. That is an app that my son wanted to use to text his friends. But inside it is a full search engine that he could search for anything in the world. So I said, no, son, you can't have this app because it has a search engine in it. Okay. So we delete that. He gets a different text messenger that doesn't have a browser inside. So you have to set some guidelines, and you're going to have to do this interactively with your kids, and you're going to have to pick up their phone on a regular basis. On a regular basis, I go, I want to see, can I see your phone? And there's no arguments about it. They just know, hey, this is part of our atmosphere in our home. And I flip through their phone and see what apps they have, and I click on them, see what's inside. That's not for every parent, without a doubt. But they've had the years of experience to know what the standards of our home are. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And so, and I don't say that lightly. I want to encourage you to embrace that. No home is perfect. Boy, don't we all make a lot of mistakes in our homes, right? But as a parent, I want to help guide them and teach them so that when they leave my house one day, I haven't done a good job of raising a kid. I've done a good job of raising an adult who's going to go out into a successful marriage and have a good relationship, and not one that's burdened down with junk that they found on the phone.
So how much is Covenant Eyes? Is it going to break your bank?
So here's the really cool part about Covenant Eyes is it's cheap. It's very inexpensive. For $12.99, you cover all the devices in your home, regardless of what your family looks like. You decide what your family looks like. For instance, let me give you an example. If you have one child or 17, you cover all their devices. If they need to go to Grandma and Grandpa's house after school, that's okay. Grandpa and Grandma need to be part of your plan. Go ahead and give Grandpa and Grandma a username and password so they can have a report separate from your kids. So when your kids go over to Grandma and Grandpa's house, what they do online goes on your kids' reports and not on Grandma and Grandpa's, right? The filter follows them as well. Here's a cool thing that is an extra benefit. So in my church and some of my friends, several people a good number use Covenant Eyes. And so if my son goes over to their house and gets on their computer, whatever he does on their computer is on his report, and I get to see it, even though he's on another family's computer. Isn't that cool? So if you create a community where you are protecting your kids, they get the great benefit of, hey, mom and dad are going to be looking out for me even though I'm on a computer in somebody else's home. And it just creates this a community of accountability. I think it's incredibly valuable.
Awesome. Well, I'd like to, this time just want us to call us to pray, because I know it's late. We want you to be able to answer some questions in the back. I want to ask Pastor Vasily to come up here and also to pray for us and those that are here, those that are watching online. I know this is going to be a big hit online because, if you say, hey, come to sexual purity, and people are feeling, well, if I come, people are going to think I've got issues or something. So I'm just not going to come and watch online. But we want to pray. We want to pray for everyone here, leaders and parents that are here. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for making that a priority. Pastor, and I'm going to ask also Dr. Lambert also if he can come up. Let's stand to our feet.
Мы просим Тебя, дай нам благодати и мудрости. Мы понимаем, что время делает нам вызовы, и иногда кажется, мы не ко всему готовы и способны, Боже. Но мы верим, что у Тебя есть ответ на все жизненные ситуации. В Твоем Слове есть для нас откровение, есть для нас воодушевление, Господь, и Ты умудряешь нас, как поступать правильно и благоразумно. И Ты сказал, что вы примите силу, когда сойдет на вас Святой Дух, и сможем мы, Господи, верим, преодолеть всякие вызовы и трудности времени. Благослови нас, наши семьи, дома наши благослови. Господи, мы хотим быть Твоим светом. Мы хотим проповедовать этому миру силу Твою, силу в действии, силу, способную воодушевлять нас и наполнять нас настолько, чтобы мы были победителями во всех жизненных ситуациях. Благослови нас во имя Иисуса, просим Тебя об этом. Благодарим Тебя за гостей, которые посетили нас и служили нам, Господь. Пусть это служение сегодняшнего дня и тема, которую мы поднимали, и ответы, которые мы получили, пусть это все послужит для нас, нам для созидания и благословения наших жизней. Аминь.